It's weird thinking about the journey that Aquaman has gone through. He was a golden age hero that tended to mix a lot of high fantasy elements into the superhero genre. Sure, there was that awkward era in the Silver Age that all heroes went through, and then he became the biggest joke character with the Super Friends. They tried to swing the pendulum the other way too hard, and they made him an overly edgy, brooding anti-hero. He grew a beard and had a harpoon for a hand. But no, fans will always think of him as the dude who talks to fish. Then, in October 2014, it was announced that Game of Thrones' Jason Momoa would be playing Aquaman, and fans were intrigued. By February 2015, Zack Snyder tweeted out his first look with the Unite the Seven poster. And yeah, this immediately wiped away any damage to Aquaman's image that Robot Chicken did.
Last one of the party can't fly! You're gonna be the last one of the party!
By the time we got the theatrical release of the Justice League film, he was now undeniably the coolest member of the team. His design leaned heavily into Momoa's Polynesian heritage, and this was the breath of fresh air that the character needed. It's hard to overstate how impactful this redesign was. He went from this to this, and his solo film following the events of the Justice League was an undeniable success. Aquaman made almost $1.2 billion. That's more than any other solo film in the DCEU, more than any of the other team-ups like Batman v Superman or the Justice League. It even made more than any Christopher Nolan Batman film. And the only two films in Warner Brothers' entire 100-year history of filmmaking that made more money than this was the grand finale to the Harry Potter franchise and the recently released Barbie. And yeah, Aquaman was a great film. It took the Snyder version that film fans loved and very subtly brought in the elements that comic book fans knew and enjoyed. It wasn't highbrow cinema or anything, but it was a thoroughly enjoyable film. 5 years later, and it looks like we might actually get Aquaman 2 this December, and Warner Brothers finally decided to release a trailer to remind everyone that, yeah, it's still happening. And it's also going to be directed by James Wan and written by David Leslie Johnson McGoldrick again. These two make fantastic work together, and I fully trust their vision. With all that, it still might not be enough to drum up enough fan interest, because, oh man, this film has a lot stacked against it. Let's get into it. Aquaman 2: The Lost Kingdom is actually the final installment of the DC Extended Universe that goes all the way back to Man of Steel. But it wasn't planned to be the finale, and the only goodwill that the Flash film had was it being built up as the final chapter, but it wasn't. This feels like when you're saying your grand goodbyes to a friend, you bro hug and all the catch you next time dude, but then you two are still walking in the same direction to your car, so you awkwardly have to forget that all that moment happened. Now you say your actual goodbyes in the parking lot again. This is that. Then there's all the stuff about Amber Heard. I just don't have the bandwidth to care about celebrity drama, and I had a million other things going on during the very public trial against Johnny Depp. The allegations from both sides were very serious, and I understand why people see her as persona non grata. Trust me, I get it. But despite rumors, she's still in the film even after many reshoots. Speaking of reshoots, pickup shots are normal, and a reshoot can actually be a good thing for a film to fix some problems with it. That's why they're a thing. Yet there's apparently 3 major reshoots for Aquaman 2, and the project was overseen by 3 different heads of DC Productions. For context, that's 3 different bosses telling James Wan 3 different ways to do things. The first round of test screenings were bad, and the second round was apparently worse. And I guess Ben Affleck and Michael Keaton were both back as Batman, but that only really makes sense in the context of the events of the Flash film, but not really afterwards. But honestly, that's not even my biggest concern. What I see as one of the biggest problems with Aquaman 2 is that there really isn't much story left to tell. Many of the stories from the great comics were squished together to make the first film, but there's still some room to work with. Barring any team-ups with the Justice League like we saw in Drowned Earth, or Elseworld stories that happened like in Flashpoint, or even just retellings of his origin story like in Sword of Atlantis. So let's get into the actual trailer of the film. What we know from the trailers is actually pretty solid. No complaints. Arthur settled down and had a kid with Mara. Manta is back and carrying the new Black Trident, and from what it seems, he's the one who burns down Aquaman's dad's lighthouse, but I can assume this is all to kick off the events of the film. He's going to have to reunite the 7 kingdoms of the ocean to take on whatever threat he's going to have to face in this movie, and he's teaming up with his brother Orm to save Atlantis and finally unite the 7. You know, from the poster. They travel around places we've already seen from the first film with one new place, talk about taking care of your family, plop in a few big cool looking CGI fight moments, and that's basically it for the trailer. From what we know from anyone who's worked on the film, it was described by the director as a bromance action adventure movie. And we're also probably not going to get a lot of Amber Heard, because in the court hearings, I guess she said that her character was mostly off screen raising a baby. So that tracks. They also include 3 fantastic comic runs at the very end that I highly recommend, because they're some of Aquaman's best stories, and they may be used as inspiration, although I don't think that's what the film will focus on. 2011's Aquaman the Trench was his big reboot into the New 52 continuity, and immediately he takes on the Trench King at the bottom of the Marianas Trench. This is a very good way to show that it's not just seahorses and dolphins in the ocean. It's scary as down there. We saw a few scenes of them in the last movie, so I believe they're probably under Aquaman's rule. It was a great story arc, but probably won't take up too much of the plot. Then is 2018's Aquaman War for the Throne. This storyline gave the most inspiration to the first film. I mean, unless this film will also focus on Arthur's time spent with the Justice League, making the people at Atlantis resent him, and Orm trying to leverage that for his own gain. For a second movie? Nah. Which leaves us with the first Aquaman story of the DC rebirth, Aquaman the Drowning. A group of Atlantean extremists called the Deluge attack the surface world. Manta forms a shadow organization group with the government called Nemo to go after the Atlanteans. And Aquaman is stuck in the middle of the two trying to bring peace, which he fails at. This new bad guy named Coram Wrath is now the new king of Atlantis. There's also another major clue that I think tells us everything we need to know, and it came from James Wan's Instagram, where he shared a photo of the production slate at the start of the production reading Necros. It's not uncommon for studios to use a separate working title for a major film, which means probably nothing, or it could mean everything. Going off the Lost Kingdom subtitle, we probably will get this place as the final kingdom under Aquaman's rule. From the first film, there's the city of Atlantis, Zebul, where Dolph Lundgren's character is from, the Brine, all those crab people, the Fisherman's Kingdom, which wasn't really given too much explanation, but they're the mer people, the Trench, which we saw, the Kingdom of the Deserters, which isn't from the comics, but we saw it in the film turn into the Sahara Desert. There's also the Uncharted Sea from the first film where they found Atlanta, but that really wasn't underwater per se, and it's more of a waypoint in the center of the world. Plus, if they focus on it too much, that plot point has been done to death by Journey to the Center of the Earth and Godzilla vs. Kong, and it just really isn't that interesting. But Necros, on the other hand, could be badass and worthy of a finale. Necros, or the Black City, is a magical city deep in the ocean that slips in and out of reality and is ruled by a despotic tyrant named Mongo. So, remember how Aquaman stories back in the day were kind of weak? Yeah, this place only ever appeared in one single issue and was never mentioned again. And there's also this giant evil shrimp. Although, it is a pretty badass name for a city. The black and green lettering around the slate does look awfully familiar to the black trident that Manta was using, so I can assume that it's gotta be related in some fashion. Everyone on the internet thinks these are the Trench folk, but they're not. Their eyes glow green. And the tower in the background does look like the one from Aquaman Volume 1, number 30. Putting all the pieces together, I think I have a pretty good guess on what the plot will be. The intro takes place in an ice layer because the production slate says Scene 2 on it. It could be Manta meeting with somebody to get the trident. We don't know. Arthur is living a peaceful life with his wife, son, and father. Manta starts the fight with his new weapon, and we see this army of tentacle monsters and skeletons around him as they burn down the lighthouse. Aquaman knows only one person can help him stop this threat, his brother, who also had a magical trident back in the first film, and probably thinks he might know something about this one too. So Arthur goes to the Sahara Desert to release Orm, and he fights these dudes that kind of look like Groot, but more ocean-like. They get to the Uncharted Sea and have their adventure in Act 2. On the way out, since this is where Aquaman is also wearing his gray clothes that we see him wearing in the jungle, he goes back to Atlantis to fight Manta again when he gets blasted by a sonic wave into the rocks. Since his family would have no home after the lighthouse was attacked, it would make sense if Mera and her son went there. I think this is where we're going to get one of the best Aquaman moments in any medium. The animated Justice League episode, The Enemy Below, where both him and his son were falling into lava, and without a moment of hesitation, he chops his own hand off to save his son. Which is so much cooler than how he loses his hand in the comic books. It's piranhas. And then I'm pretty sure we're going to get a backstory dump with what happened with King Atland and his fight with the original person with the Black Trident. And this will all come from the Lost Kingdom of Necros. Instead of being led by someone with a dumb name like Mongo, I believe it'll now be run by the Deluge's leader, Coram Wrath, who looks like this in the comics, and it could be this guy in the trailer. My guess is that this is who Game of Thrones Palau Asake will be playing, so this could easily become the DC's version of Lovecraft's sunken city of R'lyeh, the prison of Cthulhu. And DC even has its own version of Cthulhu, Cthulhu, who was used in another great two-part animated Justice League episode, The Terror Beyond. Act 3 is now about stopping Coram Wrath from unleashing Cthulhu. Aquaman needs to regain his strength, he sticks a harpoon where his left hand was, and then he goes to save the day, and the DCEU was finally set off with a bow after the last few duds. But what do you guys think about the upcoming Aquaman 2 film? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you enjoyed today's video, please hit that like button and subscribe for more weekly content on comic books and nerd stuff. I've been Eric, and you've been awesome.